The courtyard, moments earlier calm and sunlit, now felt like the center of a tightening storm. Guards moved with urgency but control, forming a quiet perimeter. Police vehicles rolled in without sirens, just flashing lights cutting across the stone walls. The air shifted from routine.
It happened in less than 15 seconds, just enough time for a royal guard to decide whether to follow protocol or save a crying child behind a locked car door. The SUV looked ordinary, official, almost forgettable. But the moment Sergeant James Alden spotted a tiny hand pressed against the tinted glass, everything changed. Inside was Princess Charlotte, red-eyed, terrified, silently begging for help. Why was she there? Why was the door locked? Why was the driver accelerating toward the gate? And why wasn't she with her parents? Something was deeply, dangerously wrong. Before we dive into what the guard discovered and the shocking chain of events it triggered, go ahead and tap like if you enjoy real royal stories told with honesty and heart. And if you're new here, feel free to subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter of this unfolding royal saga. Now, let's get into it. The afternoon at Windsor should have been uneventful, quiet, predictable, the kind of shift royal guards secretly appreciated. Sergeant James Alden liked days like this, the kind where the wind rustled through the manicured gardens, tourists laughed softly at the gates, and nothing more dramatic than a late delivery van threatened his rhythm. He'd served 12 years between the Army and the Royal Guard, and calm days were a blessing. But calm never lasts long in a place where power, protocol, and human emotion collide. James was halfway across the east courtyard when he heard it soft, muffled, too fragile for open air. Not a scream, not even a full cry. More like a child trying not to cry. He froze. Most guards wouldn't have heard it. The courtyard swallowed, sound like a sponge. But James had trained himself to listen for the wrong sounds, the ones that didn't match the environment. Something in that quiet, broken noise tightened his chest. He turned his head. At first, he saw nothing unusual, just a black SUV rolling slowly toward the gate. Diplomatic plates, tinted windows, engine humming smoothly. A vehicle that belonged here. Yet something felt off. Vehicles leaving the palace usually had at least some chatter on the radio network, a mention, a clearance, a notification. This one had none, and the speed slow, deliberate, but oddly intentional made James narrow his eyes. He changed direction without thinking. As he stepped closer, he noticed a shape behind the rear window. A shadow, no, a hand, small, pressed against the glass dot, then the fingers spread. Dot 5, dot then 4, then 3. James's heart jolted. That wasn't random movement. Children don't count down for fun like that, not with a trembling hand and blurred eyes. This was controlled, purposeful, scared. He moved faster. The SUV didn't slow. If anything, the driver accelerated, heading straight toward the scheduled open gate. It was the perfect moment to slip out without attracting attention. A guard changeover, tourists gathering, radio silence. "Stop!" His voice cut across the courtyard, sharp and commanding. "Palace security, stop the vehicle." The driver didn't even glance his way. James broke into a run, boots crunching on gravel. The nearby guard at the booth, Private Miles, young and new, looked startled as James approached. "Close the gate." James barked. Miles hesitated. "Sir, protocol diplomatic clearance. Close it." Now. The urgency in James's tone overpowered the rulebook. Miles slammed the button. The heavy steel gate began sliding shut. The SUV was seconds away. Light feet. 6, 4. The brakes screeched. The vehicle stopped just shy of the closing bars. James approached the driver's side window, adrenaline sharpening his senses. The driver lowered the window 2 inches, barely enough to speak. "Is there a problem, Sergeant?" The man's voice was smooth, practiced. Too practiced. James leaned in slightly. Authorization for departure, displayed on the dash. Fully cleared. True, they were there. The papers looked official. But papers don't explain the crying he heard. They don't explain the countdown. And they certainly don't explain the fact that the child inside seemed terrified. "I'll need visual confirmation of passengers," James said. "That won't be necessary." The voice from the back seat was female, mature, clipped, authoritative. James froze for a millisecond. He knew that tone. Every Royal Guard did. The rear window tint hid her face, but the voice was unmistakable. Queen Camilla. His stomach tightened. The situation had just escalated from unusual to potentially career-ending. "Your Majesty," James said carefully, "I heard distress from the rear compartment. I need to verify the child's well-being." "Princess Charlotte is perfectly fine," Camilla replied. "We are running late for a private appointment. Open this gate immediately." The words were calm. The tone was not. James stepped toward the rear window. The angle of the light shifted just enough for him to glimpse inside, and his breath caught. Princess Charlotte was there, face streaked with tears, cheeks flushed, eyes wide with the kind of fear children struggle to hide. She mouthed something. "Help me." James felt it like a punch. Protocol hammered in his mind. Never confront a senior royal, never obstruct, never act on instinct without confirmation. But training from his military years overrode everything else. When a child signals distress, you move. "Your Majesty," he said, voice firming, "I need visual confirmation directly." "For her safety. You are overstepping your authority," Camilla snapped. Charlotte shook her head violently behind the glass. Her hands were trembling so badly that her fingertips tapped the window. James tried the door handle. Locked. Child lock engaged. He circled to the opposite side. Locked. Inside, Charlotte's lips moved again. Desperately, Dot helped Dot. That was it. His decision was made. "Open the door, ma'am," James said, voice no longer gentle. "Or I will." You wouldn't dare, but she underestimated him. James Alden was many things: disciplined, structured, respectful. But above all else, he was a protector. He positioned himself squarely by the door, body tense, hand close to his emergency tool. Before he could act, the driver stepped out, large and defensive. "You need to back off, mate. Stay in the vehicle," James warned. The man advanced. James reacted instinctively: sidestep, pivot, leverage. In seconds, the driver was face down on the gravel. Not harmed, but firmly controlled. Miles in the booth looked stunned. "Sergeant, what do I do?" "Call backup." Miles reached for the radio, but another voice interrupted through James's own earpiece. "Sergeant Alden, report. Captain Rowland?" The highest-ranking security officer on site. James kept his voice steady. "Sir, Princess Charlotte is in a vehicle attempting to exit grounds. She appears distressed. Requesting immediate hold. A pause. Hold position. Back up en route." The driver stiffened beneath James, hearing every word. Inside the car, Charlotte's crying grew more urgent. Within 30 seconds, 2 guards sprinted across the courtyard. The atmosphere shifted, the calm of the palace evaporated. Captain Rowland arrived moments later, calm but visibly tense. He approached Camilla's window. "Your Majesty, for the safety of all, please unlock the doors. This is outrageous." Camilla snapped. "I will have every one of you dismissed." But the locks clicked open. James released the driver and hurried to the rear door. The moment he opened it, Charlotte threw herself out straight into his uniform, sobbing. She clung to him, shaking. She said, "If I told anyone, something bad would happen to Mummy." Charlotte cried into his coat. She said not to tell. The courtyard fell silent. James felt the chill run through every guard present. Something far more serious was unfolding than any of them had imagined. And he had only just stopped it in time.
the crisis without a single person raising their voice. Sergeant James Alden stood at the center of it, Charlotte trembling in his arms, her tears soaking into the deep navy blue of his uniform. He had comforted wounded soldiers before, carried frightened civilians through burning streets overseas, but nothing in his career had felt quite like the responsibility of holding a terrified princess. Captain Rowland approached him first. "Alden," he said quietly, "set her down gently. We need to assess." Charlotte clutched tighter, panic spiking in her small voice. "No, no, don't let me go. Please don't let me go." James knelt, so she wouldn't feel like she was losing height or safety. "I'm not going anywhere," he assured her. "You're safe. Nobody is taking you away again." Rowland softened his tone. "Charlotte, sweetheart, we just need to make sure you're okay. Sergeant Alden will stay with you if you want." She nodded desperately. "I want him." That single sentence struck James harder than any order he'd ever received. He carried her inside the security booth, stepping beneath the low doorway with gentle precision. The booth, usually mundane and cluttered with paperwork, suddenly became a sanctuary. A blanket was thrown over Charlotte's shoulders. A bottle of water was placed near her hand. James stayed kneeling beside her chair, not touching her unless she initiated it, maintaining the exact balance of comfort and professionalism that palace training drilled into him. But in truth, it wasn't training that guided him. It was instinct. Outside, he could hear the swarm of activity. Officers murmuring, guards repositioning, someone requesting immediate contact with Prince William, someone else requesting location confirmation for Princess Catherine, and nearer the SUV, Camilla's voice clipped and icy. "This is excessive, entirely unnecessary. You're acting like lunatics." James didn't look out the window. His focus stayed on Charlotte, whose breaths were uneven, small hiccups punctuating every exhale. "Charlotte," he said gently, "can you tell me if you're hurt?" She shook her head. "Did anyone scare you? Touch you? Threaten you?" Her chin trembled, and she dropped her voice to a shaky whisper. She said if I didn't come with her, something bad would happen to Mummy." A chill spread down James's spine. He kept his expression calm. "Who said that, sweetheart?" "Queen Camilla." James's jaw tensed almost imperceptibly. He kept his voice steady. "All right. Thank you. You're very brave for telling me. You did exactly the right thing." The booth door opened. Detective Inspector Eleanor Reeves stepped in, a small woman with sharp eyes and a warm voice. Someone who had navigated more royal crises than most people knew existed. She crouched down at eye level with Charlotte. "Hello, love," she said gently. "I'm here to make sure you're completely safe. Is it all right if I ask you a few things?" Charlotte's hand tightened around James's sleeve. He nodded to her. "I'll stay. I promise." She gave the tiniest, trembling nod. Inspector Reeves began. "Charlotte, can you tell me what happened at school today? I was supposed to be in class." Her voice caught. "But a lady from staff came to get me. She said Queen Camilla wanted to see me. She said it was important. And then—" Reeves asked softly. Charlotte's eyes filled again. "Camilla told me it was a special trip, a secret one. She said we had to leave fast. She said Mummy would be too stressed to know. She said we'd go somewhere far away where no one could interrupt us." Reeves exchanged a glance with James, one of those unspoken moments when adults silently confirm that something is very, very wrong. "Did she say why it had to be a secret?" Reeves asked. Charlotte nodded. "She said that if I told Mummy might get sick, really sick." Tears rolled down again. "I don't want Mummy to be sick." James felt something hot rise in his chest. Anger wasn't an emotion guards were ever supposed to indulge in, especially not in uniform. But in that moment he felt it, quiet, controlled, but burning. Reeves continued gently. "When did you start feeling scared?" "When she made a phone call. She said, 'Everything's ready. The window is open now. We leave before they notice.'" Charlotte swallowed hard. I didn't know what that meant, but it felt wrong. Really wrong. And then I remembered the signal Mummy taught us. Charlotte lifted her hand slowly, recreating the countdown. 5 fingers for 3, if we're ever in danger, we do that where a guard can see. She said guards would always help. Reeves looked at James again. There was respect there, quiet but unmistakable. And Sergeant Alden saw you, Reeves said. Charlotte nodded with a tiny, grateful smile toward James. I was so scared he wouldn't understand. But he did. Before Reeves could continue, the booth door opened again. A hush fell, because Princess Catherine stepped inside. Her face was pale, her hand shaking ever so slightly despite her efforts to appear composed. But the moment she saw Charlotte, the composure crumbled. Charlotte, the little girl, burst into sobs and launched herself into her mother's arms. Catherine caught her, holding her so tightly it looked as if she might never let go again. "Oh, sweetheart, my darling girl, I'm here. You're safe now. You're safe." Charlotte's words spilled out in a broken rush. "Mummy, she said you'd be sick. She said not to tell. She said—" "No, no, no." Catherine stroked her daughter's hair, voice thick with emotion. "None of that is true. None of it. You did the right thing. You were so brave." Behind Catherine, Prince William stood in the doorway. He didn't speak at first. He simply looked at Charlotte, then at James. Their eyes met. There was fury in William's expression. Not wild, but focused, contained, the kind that comes from a father who has nearly lost something irreplaceable. And beneath that fury, gratitude. "You're Sergeant Alden?" William asked. "Yes, sir," James replied. William nodded once, jaw tight. "Thank you. If you hadn't acted—" His voice cracked for a split second. "Thank you." James dipped his head respectfully. "Just doing my duty, sir." William's eyes hardened slightly. "No, you went far beyond duty." Outside, the commotion swelled, officer, investigators, and senior palace staff converging. Inside the booth, Catherine held her daughter as if shielding her from the world. William stayed at their side. And James stood near the door, a silent guardian who knew the weight of what had nearly happened. And what he had prevented. He didn't yet know the truth that would unravel in the coming hours. He didn't yet know the accusations, the denials, or the consequences. But he did know this. Instinct had saved a child. And now, the palace would have to face whatever came next. The minutes after Catherine embraced Charlotte marked the start of a full-scale royal emergency, one that would unravel layer by shocking layer. What began as a simple, suspicious vehicle departure had now evolved into something far deeper, darker, and far more calculated than anyone inside the palace walls initially understood. Outside the security booth, the tension was almost physical. Officers moved with coordinated precision. Guards stood with expressions carved from stone. Senior palace staff whispered urgently into phones. And at the center of the courtyard, the black SUV sat like an unspoken threat, silent, still, but radiating questions. Detective Inspector Eleanor Reeves, who had been questioning Charlotte only moments before, straightened as her radio crackled with updates. "Inspector, the driver is in custody." "Copy that. Keep him separated from Her Majesty." Separated. James noticed a word. Not the Queen, or Queen Camilla. Reeves had switched to professional terminology reserved for persons under investigation. Camilla stood near the SUV, flanked by 2 officers. Her expression was a mask. Her features composed, regal, but her eyes flickering with something more volatile. Anger? Fear? Calculation? James couldn't tell. What he could tell was this. She was no longer in control. Reeves approached the SUV with gloves on, opening the rear door to examine the interior. The scent inside was faintly floral, with a layer of something sterile. Cleaning solution. Too clean. Almost scrubbed. James watched her remove a small, folded blanket from the seat. Pink. Soft. Charlotte's. But something else caught Reeves's attention. A duffel bag on the floor. She unzipped it slowly. Inside were children's clothes, neatly folded. Enough for several days. A toothbrush. A small stuffed toy. Books. Snacks. A water bottle. And a cell phone with the SIM card removed. Reeves inhaled sharply. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment outing. It was preparation. Deliberate, planned, and concealed. She zipped the duffel bag shut. Her face had changed, from focused to solemn. "Get this to forensics," she said quietly. Immediately, 2 officers hurried over to retrieve it. Meanwhile, another detective stepped up to Reeves. "Inspector, you're going to want to hear the driver's statement." James listened from a respectful distance, but the courtyard was too tense, too silent. Every word carried. "We need to clarify something," Reeves said. In his initial interview, the driver contradicted Her Majesty's account. James stiffened slightly. Contradicted. That was a dangerous word inside the palace. Reeves continued. "He claims Queen Camilla insisted on a non-standard pickup. She chose him specifically, despite not being on the approved royal driver list. She instructed him to avoid all routine checkpoints and use secondary exits. And he said she warned him not to speak to palace staff about the pickup." James exhaled slowly. The puzzle pieces were sliding into place, one by one. "And there's more," the detective continued. "He says Camilla told him the trip was a private retreat. Just the 2 of them. She emphasized it needed full discretion and said she would handle any questions personally." Reeves absorbed this, her jaw tightening slightly. So he believed he was following orders. That's what he's claiming. But the timing, the secrecy, it doesn't look good. It certainly didn't. Before Reeves could respond, William stepped out of the security booth. His face was pale but composed, the emotional storm held behind a carefully locked expression. He walked straight toward Reeves. "What do we know so far?" he asked. Reeves didn't soften the truth. Enough to confirm this was not an authorized departure, and enough to suspect intentional deception. William's eyes hardened. "Is there any indication she intended to harm my daughter?" Reeves chose her words carefully. "At the moment, sir, we can't assess motive. But we can say she attempted to remove Princess Charlotte from palace grounds without parental knowledge." A long silence followed. Then William asked, "Where is she planning to take her?" Reeves exhaled through her nose, steeling herself. "We're investigating a property acquired recently under a shell company linked to Her Majesty's private finances. A remote country house. Off-grid. Far." James felt his stomach drop. Charlotte had said Camilla described it as private and somewhere far away. William seemed to lose a shade of color. "And this house, how remote?" "Remote enough that no one would accidentally encounter it," Reeves replied. "And no listed staff on record." The gravity of the situation settled like frost. William looked away for a moment, blinking hard, steadying himself not as a prince, but as a father. When he turned back, his voice had changed. "Proceed with the investigation. I want every detail." "Yes, sir." Inside the booth, Catherine remained with Charlotte, whispering soft reassurances, holding her as though trying to physically erase the fear her daughter had absorbed. James hesitated at the door. He didn't want to intrude, but Catherine looked up. She motioned for him. "Sergeant Alden." He stepped inside. Catherine's voice was quiet. "Charlotte tells me she used the signal I taught her." James nodded. "She did, ma'am, and she used it perfectly." Catherine brushed Charlotte's hair, her voice breaking slightly. "I taught it, hoping it would never be needed." Charlotte lifted her head from her mother's shoulder. "But I remembered." "You did," Catherine whispered, kissing her forehead. "You remembered you were brave, and Sergeant Alden saw you." Charlotte turned toward James. "You came when I asked." Her voice was small, fragile, but steady. James swallowed before answering. "I'll always come when you ask. That's my job. And you were incredibly brave." She smiled weakly. "Mummy says bravery is scared, but doing the right thing anyway." "She's right," James replied softly. Outside, officers continued their work, gathering evidence, interviewing staff, coordinating efforts with Scotland Yard. The palace was a labyrinth of whispers, shock, and controlled panic. It wasn't just that Charlotte had been taken without authorization. It was that the person responsible was someone who should have been among the safest in her orbit, someone who held power, someone who knew how to manipulate access and authority, someone the royal family trusted. The courtyard buzzed with quiet urgency as more officials arrived. Every new piece of evidence painted the same picture. The trip wasn't innocent, wasn't spontaneous, and wasn't merely misguided judgment. It was structured, organized, planned. Reeves approached Roland with the latest update. Phone records show Her Majesty made a call shortly after picking Charlotte up. We're tracing the recipient. And the school? Roland asked. No authorization was given for Charlotte to leave. Roland cursed under his breath, low, controlled, but deeply troubled. James watched all of this unfold, realizing the weight of what he had interrupted. A vehicle moments from leaving the palace grounds. A child silently counting down. A guard trusting instinct over protocol. What would have happened if he hadn't? He didn't want to think about it. As the sun began to dip lower, William re-entered the booth. He placed a hand on Charlotte's back as Catherine held her. "Sweetheart," he said gently, "you're safe. We're going home soon." Charlotte nodded against Catherine's chest. And then William looked at James, not as a royal, as a father. "You saved my daughter," he said quietly. "We'll never forget that." James bowed his head slightly, humbled. "I just did what I hoped anyone would do." William held his gaze, but not everyone would have. Outside, officers were preparing to escort Camilla for questioning. The palace gates remained closed, tighter than ever. Staff spoke in hushed tones. The air felt heavier with every passing minute, because finally, the truth had begun to surface. And what it revealed was something the royal family would be forced to confront, privately, painfully, and irrevocably. For most people beyond the palace gates, the day moved on quietly. Tourists photographed guards, unaware of the emergency unfolding just out of sight. News crews waited elsewhere, following an entirely different royal schedule. But inside the walls of Windsor, the atmosphere had transformed, tight, quiet, and charged with the kind of tension that only comes when something unthinkable has nearly happened. As Charlotte was escorted into a secure vehicle with Catherine, the palace's inner machinery turned with speed and absolute secrecy. No sirens, no shouting, just the cold efficiency of a system built to protect those inside it. James stood near the booth door, watching the Princess of Wales carry her daughter out, Charlotte clinging to her side with the tightening grip of a child still in shock. Catherine's face was pale, but her voice stayed soft as she whispered comforts James couldn't quite hear. Before stepping into the car, Catherine turned back. "Sergeant Alden," she said gently. James straightened instinctively. "Ma'am." Her expression softened. "Thank you again. Truly." He nodded once, respectful but deeply moved. Catherine gave him a faint, emotional smile, one that said more than words could, and then ducked into the vehicle beside Charlotte. Moments later, it rolled out of the courtyard under heavy escort. The moment they left, the full weight of the aftermath crashed over the remaining staff. The investigation quietly deepens. Detective Inspector Reeves led the operation like someone assembling a puzzle in real time. Evidence was collected, security footage analyzed, radio logs combed through. Every detail mattered. And the details weren't forgiving. The remote country house, owned through a trust connected to Camilla's private account. The shell company, set up weeks earlier, with no legitimate explanation. The driver, chosen off record, hired privately. The phone call Charlotte overheard, traced to a number that made Reeves stop mid-sentence and scribble aggressively in her notebook. No single detail condemned Camilla outright, but together, they formed a picture that was impossible to dismiss as coincidence. Even Captain Roland, one of the most unshakable men James had ever served under, looked shaken as he flipped through early reports. "We're going to be buried in briefings," he muttered to James quietly. "This is the kind of incident that never sees daylight. If the palace can help it." James understood. The reputation of the monarchy relied on precision, stability, reliability. Internal crises were dealt with internally. And yet, this one felt different. This was a child, a princess, a potential abduction. However the palace phrased it behind closed doors. And that fact alone was enough to shatter the illusion of control at the palace's highest levels. Camilla is escorted away. Two senior officers approached Queen Camilla, calm, respectful, but firm. "Your Majesty, we need to continue questioning." She stiffened. "This is absurd. I have done nothing wrong." No one argued. No one bowed. No one tried to soothe her. Perhaps that silence itself was the loudest judgment. As she was escorted away, James marveled at how quickly power could feel fragile. Just hours earlier, she had walked with authority that bent rooms around her. Now she walked with tension that seemed to shrink her figure, her footsteps sharp and clipped on the stone. He didn't celebrate it. He didn't condemn her. He simply watched, understanding that consequences, even quiet ones, had finally begun. A private audience. Hours later, as the investigation shifted indoors, James received a message from Captain Rowland. Report to the private administrative wing. Full dress uniform. Immediate. James's stomach twisted. That wing wasn't for reprimands. It wasn't for routine debriefs. It was for royals. He arrived outside a modest but elegant office. A private secretary nodded, opened the door, and silently stepped aside. Inside, Princess Catherine stood alone near a window overlooking the gardens. Shadows from the late afternoon sun stretched long behind her. She turned as James walked in. He bowed respectfully. "Your Royal Highness." "At ease, Sergeant," she said softly. He rose. Catherine approached him with a calmness that seemed carefully assembled, layer by layer, over a heart still trembling from the day's events. "I wanted to speak with you privately," she said, "as a mother, not as a princess." James nodded, unsure what to expect. "You saved my daughter," Catherine continued. "You acted when others might have hesitated. You trusted your instincts over protocol, over fear, even over hierarchy." James shook his head gently. "Ma'am, I simply—" "No." She raised a hand, stopping him. "Please, let me finish." There was strength in her voice, but emotion threaded through every word. "When Charlotte is older, she will remember this day, not just for what almost happened, but for who protected her. And I want you to know, James, that she spoke of you with such trust, such certainty. She said, 'He came when I asked, Mummy.'" James swallowed, the simple sentence hitting him harder than any medal, title, or commendation ever had. Catherine stepped closer, holding out a sealed envelope. "Inside is a private letter from William and me. It won't be placed in any official file. It's for you and you alone." James accepted it carefully, feeling its weight. "Thank you, ma'am," he said quietly. "No," Catherine whispered, her eyes glistening. "Thank you for seeing her, for hearing her, for believing her, for choosing right over easy." She took a slow breath. "There are people in this palace who work their entire lives and never make the kind of impact you made today. You kept my daughter safe, and I will never forget that." She paused, then added with sincerity that left James completely still. "You are exactly the kind of man I want protecting my children." For a moment, they simply stood there, two people bound by a moment neither could ever speak of openly. Then Catherine offered a warm, grateful nod. "You're dismissed, Sergeant, and please take the rest of the day to yourself." The next day, a small, important meeting. James returned to duty the next morning, expecting the usual grind of internal reviews. But Captain Rowland pulled him aside. "You're wanted in the royal family's private sitting room," Rowland said. His tone was unreadable. "It's informal." Informal. In royal language, that meant personal. James arrived to find Charlotte standing in the room with Catherine. She wore a pale dress, her hair brushed neatly, a small nervous smile on her face. When she saw James, she brightened with relief. "Hello, Sergeant Alden," she said softly. "Hello, Your Royal Highness." She stepped closer. "I wanted to, say thank you properly. Mummy said it's important." James knelt to her level. "You don't need to thank me. You were very brave." Charlotte fiddled with her sleeve. "I was scared, really scared. But then I saw you, and I thought maybe you'd understand." "I did," James said gently, "and I always will." She gave him a small hug, quick, childlike, sincere. "You're a good knight," she whispered. James smiled. "I'm very honored you think so." Catherine watched from the doorway, her expression full of quiet gratitude. The weeks that followed, the palace moved cautiously, quietly. Publicly, nothing happened. No press releases. No rumors leaked. But internally, everything changed. Camilla's access to the Wales children became heavily restricted. Supervised only. Security protocols were upgraded across all royal residences. School staff were retrained. No pickups without triple verification. No private drivers allowed. No exceptions. And Sergeant James Alden? He was promoted 3 months later. Not publicly, not ceremonially, but subtly, quietly, through the palace's own internal channels. People whispered that his advancement had come from the very top. He never confirmed it, never boasted, never capitalized on it. He simply continued doing what he had always done, watching, listening, protecting, as the last line of defense. The one who acts when a child silently presses her hand against a window, counting down with trembling fingers, praying someone will understand.